It is such the perfect metaphor because when I bring women specifically through pregnancy and I treat it as a rites of passage, we're working through all those shadows that you mentioned, like self-doubt and fear and, all the things that happened generally when you're a child, when you were parented and you were small and your brain was formed, are the things that come up when you're in a rites of passage experience. And I really do believe that, like creating a business or birthing a project that has like a very deep dharmic meaning to you, it's the same as birthing a baby energetically. It's the same process. And so working through all of those doubts and all of those shadows is really the focus of my work, and giving people a lot of tools and resources to be with themselves kindly as they face their shadows.
Welcome to the Purpose Studio. I'm your co-host, Nida Al-Relami. Now let's get into today's episode. I was really excited for this conversation with you today because I think this is our first season for the Purpose Studio. And I mentioned before that we are interviewing a lot of founders, entrepreneurs, people who are even building tech companies or have some kind of organization that helps community and spreads impact. For the first season, I've kind of done it in a different way where I've started off with the individual's personal journey and what goes on internally before they even lead a team or work with community or develop that service. And so the past interviews that we've had so far have been with coaches for founders, and they help them go through their inner child, their shadow self, all of these things to help them be better as a leader. And so when I was thinking about our episode, I was like, wait, this is so great metaphorically and philosophically about birth. You birth an idea and all of the things that come up with that. I think there's a beautiful way that we can kind of integrate your work and what you do with your community and your business as really a starting point for any kind of founder, entrepreneur, or team in any industry, right? This is really the start of it. So I'm excited. So if you just want to give a little background about who Rachael is, where you're at, and what do you do?
My name is Rachael Jean, and I am the creatrix of Elemental Birthrights, which is an online school and support and healing network for both birth workers who are guiding couples through pregnancy and birth as a rites of passage, but also for families who are embarking on the journey of having a baby and want to approach it as a spiritual and sacred rites of passage experience. Also, the creator and birther with my husband of the Roselight Sanctuary, which is our in-person retreat center and healing sanctuary that we've been working on for the last 2.5 years, which is a home and also land where we are cultivating spaces for people to come and commune with nature, to do healing work, to just kind of unplug and unwind from the matrix and connect in many different ways. So that's just beginning, and excited to see how my work as a midwife also in my community and my work online as a birth educator and ceremonialist gets to fuse into the 3D realm here on my land with people in person.
Thank you so much, Rachael. Can you kind of walk us through this early idea, this early vision, and what was the calling to really start your life and your purpose in this space?
I'm going to ask a question to you, Nadat. Is this a safe space to share really the truth, like medicine work, all that? All good.
The Purpose Studio we are leaving it for creativity, personal stories, and we really want to go deep with people. And so we're a little bit more unconventional, open to different types of modalities of healing. So this is a good space.
In my mid-20s, got called to start working with the grandmother medicine and doing ceremonies pretty regularly, helping my teachers to clean up the space and take care of the people in the circles. I was really on a path of self-discovery, a path of self-healing, really stripping back a lot of layers in my psyche to sort of figure out why I was on this earth and what it was that I was supposed to be devoting my purpose to.
Rachael, what is grandmother medicine for people who don't know?
Ayahuasca. Yeah. Yeah. So I was, working really deeply with the medicine and trying to really understand what it was that I was meant to be doing in this time to serve humanity, to just be in my body, living my life. And the medicine really came through my teacher at that time. And there was just a download. There had been a midwife in the space that weekend who was sharing her experience. And while she was speaking, I was really trying on just the identity of what her work was and just my mind was touching it for the first time of like, is that something that I'm supposed to do? Or, and then later that night, my teacher came up to me and she was like, the medicine's coming through with this message for you, like that I want to share with you that you need to pursue this career in midwifery. And I knew what she was going to say before she said it. Like it was very much co-creative in that way. And I asked her, I was like, where do I need to go to get this training and do this thing? And she said, Texas. And I really didn't like that answer because I just didn't want to move down there. I wasn't feeling it. I was crying and just like really upset about this message. So I resisted going to Texas for almost my entire midwifery education, which I started in 2012. And yeah, the very last step of my training was to go to a birth center in Texas and get the rest of my numbers at a very busy birthing center that trained students on the border of El Paso. I was working a lot with Mexican communities who were living on the border and got to serve that population, which was actually really awesome for me. And being a Spanish speaker, I really enjoyed connecting with them and getting to work with that group of people at that time. But for whatever reason, I just knew it was going to be really hard. And it was. It's kind of like midwifery boot camp. You have to, do these 24-hour shifts and then take a day off and then go back in and do it again. I got a lot of experiences there, and it was enough to get me the numbers that I needed in order to graduate. That was kind of just a little story about when messages come through and there's parts you don't like and parts you do like. It did fit me in a lot of ways because I was very focused beforehand on herbalism and nutrition and healing. I've been a massage therapist for 20 years, so I was very focused on alternative healing, and it just felt like a place where I could bridge all of my skills into one career path. I got into home birth midwifery and have been doing that since 2015 as a professional midwife in a couple different states.
I wanted to go deeper into that cultural environment, that community knowledge and understanding. And was it in this space in Texas that you started to kind of like be introduced to it, or was there other spaces that were introducing this type of wisdom?
Yeah, I would say that there's two parts to the answer to this question. The people who owned the school and ran it were not Mexican, and they were not native to Mexico. They were people that they were midwives generally who lived in the US and had formed this school in El Paso. I will say that as a midwife, and the reason why you have to do apprenticeship in midwifery is because the people who teach you are your clients. So when you're doing your work and you're becoming a midwife, you are learning 100% basically from your in-person embodied experience practicing midwifery. And so, yes, there were people that were teachers there. There were midwives who were actually certified and had opened the school, but every person who I was serving as a client was in teaching me how to be a midwife by the interaction that I was having with them. So yeah, it wasn't like an indigenous-based school or anything like that. It was basically a clinic that was made for training midwives. And anybody in the area could come to this place and receive birth and prenatal care for a much cheaper price than like going to a hospital. In some way, some people could say that it was unethical because, it was students offering care for a cheaper price to people who could then receive like discounted midwifery care by unprofessional midwives. I mean, they were being supervised by midwives, and they did understand that that's what was happening there. It was a training center, but I wouldn't say that it was like along the lines of like indigenous knowledge or anything like that. It was basically just a birthing center where students are practicing and learning from the clients that they're serving in that way. But I understand the conversation that you're trying to open, and I appreciate it because I do think there's a lot to be said for midwifery specifically in terms of learning from indigenous midwives, because they're the ones that kept the practice and the art alive when all the witches were being burned and midwifery went underground for many years. The indigenous peoples of Mexico and different countries around the world that didn't have the medicalization of birth, they really kept a lot of the traditional midwifery practices alive. Maybe it wouldn't exist, if it hadn't still been being practiced in those communities. So it's sort of something that you have to seek out if you really want to learn from those people how to do the art of midwifery in the way that they have kept the traditions alive in different places.
On your website, you mentioned something about a mystery school, and you described midwifery as this. And so what does this mean? What is the definition for you? And how does it relate to things like trust, surrender, and transformation? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is the feminine, the sacred feminine, because basically as a student of birth, because anybody who sits at the altar of birth is a student of birth because it doesn't ever manifest in the same form or express in the same way through different individuals. Sitting at the feet of women who are birthing is really just sitting at the feet of the great mystery. It's God. We're watching the divine move through humans in the form of birth, and it's extremely powerful in that way. And I like to approach my work in that way because it has a very spiritual significance for me to be sitting in that particular position, like welcoming spirits that are just incarnating for the first breath and being there as a guide for the family to receive that child in a safe way. My whole approach to midwifery is very, I would say, probably out of the box because for me, it's so sacred. And when I think about mystery schools, I think about like coveted esoteric knowledge that not everybody is privy to. And I really feel that honor when I sit at the feet of women who are birthing because I'm witnessing something that not many people in this world get to witness. It's a very intimate moment, and the veil is very thin in those spaces, and there's a lot that comes through in the subtle realms, as well as just like being witness to new life. It's very similar to the exit of death, which I also feel like is very taboo in our culture. And those are the most final and massive movements that humans make between the spirit and the matter form. So for me, I sit there and I feel very humbled by the bigness of being privy to that space and being somebody who gets to kind of study the subtlety of that space just by being present there again and again and again and seeing the energetics of that space. So when I teach my work and when I talk about my work, I'm talking about the great feminine and the sacred energy of the divine feminine on earth.
Amazing. Can you kind of like walk our listeners through that transformation that happens with the woman who is pregnant leading up to the birth? It's interesting because yesterday I was writing an essay and I was talking about burnout and trying to come back to my creativity. And I was really studying this because when I was in the trance of like writing about this whole transformation of between the idea and like what you execute comes the doubt and the fear and all of the garbage. And I was like, how do I get to the part where it's manifested? And I realized a lot of the ideas of birth started coming up for me because like 2 weeks ago, I just went home and I saw my best friend give birth. I didn't see her give birth, but she showed me the video and I was there after he was born and I was holding him and I had to become so present just staring at him in my arms. And it just started to click to me that natural instinct of motherhood that I never thought that I related to until up to this moment. And I just saw so many parallels of like, even in my own experience, birthing an idea and the care and the love and the transformation that has to go with and it's not that you give this baby an arm or a leg, you have to like care for it for the rest of his life. And so that's kind of how I thought about this incubator phase of my idea. And so I kind of just wanted to talk more about this transformative process that goes with the women because this is what you coach them with as a doula, birth doula as well, and a midwifery.
Yeah, so there is such a beautiful metaphor to be drawn. I'm also not a mother of live children, so I'm a creatrix in more of an esoteric way. It's like I birth ideas, I birth art, I birth music, and it is such the perfect metaphor because when I bring women specifically through pregnancy and I treat it as a rites of passage, we're working through all those shadows that you mentioned, like self-doubt and fear and, all the things that happened generally when you're a child, when you were parented and you were small and your brain was formed, are the things that come up when you're in a rites of passage experience. And I really do believe that, like creating a business or birthing project that has like a very deep dharmic meaning to you, it's the same as birthing a baby energetically. It's the same process. And so working through all of those doubts and all of those shadows is really the focus of my work and giving people a lot of tools and resources resources to be with themselves kindly as they face their shadows. It just feels like what I saw was like a missing part of midwifery care, because I would watch all these women walking through their pregnancies with like very like data based analytics of like, oh, this is your blood pressure and this is your baby's weight and this is the ultrasound picture. And that doesn't really address like the spiritual emotional journey that a woman goes on when she's literally gestating this new life. And so I really felt like turning towards the psycho spiritual emotional journey and giving women resources and also guiding them through like things that are normal that are going to come up is so helpful, because when that birthing, that labor starts, which you're talking right now about like the labor of like creating, it's not always fun. It's not always inspiring. It's not always flowing easily. Like sometimes we get stuck, we get blocked. That process is called labor, right? And it leads generally to the birth of a child. And I do feel that women get tested. They get this like usually very intense karmics that is like brought up into their psyche that they have to work through. And so introducing, looking at childhood wounding, looking at like the things that come up for you that cause resistance. What is your relationship to your inner dialogue? What is your relationship to relationship? In general, what is your relationship to your body? How do you relate to your mind? How do you relate to transformation and spiritual growth and evolution? Like getting in touch with those little points before you're in that tested trial of birthing the thing that you're creating, it's so helpful to do so as part of your process so that you feel a sense of preparedness, especially when you're being tried like in labor, because labor is really, really hard physiologically, and I don't know for you, like if you have moments in your creation process where you're like, this is the hardest part, or like you feel like you're being narrowed into this funnel and tested and tried. But I've definitely seen that as a massive part of the creation process. And then I loved what you said. And then once you birth something, your idea, you have to take care of it. And that's like a whole nother thing with postpartum, because yes, there's pregnancy and birth, and those are hard and they have their challenges and everything, and there's a lot of focus on them. But I think often you see that postpartum just literally gets completely forgotten about. Like even within the medical system, they generally have one medical visit to check on a woman and her baby around 6 weeks, which so much comes up in the period of birth to 6 weeks that needs support and guidance. And that's what midwifery care offers. But also like within the creation process, I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs and stuff, they're very much about like launches, and they focus a lot on like, this is what you need, this template, this. But then what I really felt like I need as an entrepreneur was help once I got it out. Like, okay, well, how do I maintain this? And how do I keep the spark of inspiration flowing? It's like those tools and tactics need to be, I think, introduced in the creation process before the creation is launched, because then you have maybe practices that you're engaging with along the timeline that are going to help you to sustain the thing that you want to put out there.
This is exactly what I wanted people to experience listening to this episode. And it's right at where I'm at as well, where it's oftentimes I feel like there's like this high of the idea. I've been thinking a lot about how much I'm sharing as well out in the open, because it's like you're beating away the spark of what you need to build by speaking too much or just like kind of fantasizing about the idea, but not actually executing. And I think maybe this is more relatable for newer entrepreneurs rather than like maybe an entrepreneur that's been kind of in it for a couple of years. But for me, just starting off, it's kind of what you were talking about, keeping this momentum. And even when the inspiration dies or there is a lack of like motivation to keep going, how do you take those moments and rest and then come back out? Because that's like the natural flow of it. Maybe this is, I mean, I don't know because I haven't had a child, but maybe this is kind of the postpartum journey as well. It's, there's this leading up to the birth, I'm sure is like this crazy moment. And then afterwards, how do you maintain that? What are some of the emotions and the things that come up for women after the birth experience?
Well, I'm sure, I mean, I know a lot of people have heard of postpartum depression, but it's super common. And it makes so much sense because there is so much emphasis on pregnancy and birth as being this like joyful, and everybody wants to know about it. And they're, involved, and there's this element of surprise. But I think once you are, or I've seen this, that once you're faced with like the reality of the day in, day out mundane tasks of raising a child and like what it takes to feed them, like it takes a lot. Like literally women are, they're being asked by their child to be on 24/7. Like the job is not complete once the baby is born. It's like it becomes even more demanding. And so losing sleep, just staying up all night and not having enough sleep can be enough to just make somebody feel really unmotivated or really like down. And I think that that's one of our hopes within the midwifery community is to make people really aware of the normalness of postpartum depression, but also to know the signs when it's crossing over into maybe like a dangerous territory where the mom just really can't function and she's having bad thoughts about herself or her baby. But to normalize it so that when women are feeling this way, they realize that it's not because they're not like good mothers or they're not doing something wrong, but it's just so common, not only hormonally to have a huge drop in your mood, but also just less sleep, more work, a lot of focus, not a lot of time for self-care. Like it's just a very challenging time in that way. And I feel like even communities, like babies are born, you get congratulated, maybe somebody wants to come over and hold your baby, but who's helping you do your laundry? Like who's helping you keep your house in order? That's where the rubber meets the road. Like people, I think, are a little bit less tuned into the needs of families. And we live so isolated that I think it's really normal for people to back in and out of other people's lives, at least within communities. And then for the parents or the family or the mom to feel that they don't have enough support within that time. And so, yeah, it's something just to really think about, especially within motherhood, because it is the birth of a child is also the death of the maiden. For instance, if this was your first baby, this business, then you're no longer a maiden anymore. You're a mother. And that death can be identity wise very confronting because like the things that you were into, the things that you oriented around before you had your first child are no longer the things that you'll orient around now that you're a mother. So I think there's so many layers of why and how it can be hard and very like confronting on the other side of birth. But I think it's very dynamic and it just depends on the individual and like their community context and their support levels.
What are some of the tools that you help women learn about and integrate to help them, feel a little bit better about this process, that it's not going to be this high of emotions? What do they do? Because I think maybe some of these tools and techniques individuals can necessarily, but like are running a business or trying to take care of a community, a team can utilize as well.
That's an awesome question. The very first thing that I do with my clients is I walk them through like a reconciliation with their mother and father. And I do this for many, many reasons. Obviously, when women become mothers, there's a lot of significance there. And as a midwife, we play a very motherly role. There can often be a lot of projection, but the mother wound is an awesome starting point to where I like to bring a lot of tools and resources in. It was a very big healing process for me in my life and still continues to unfold for me to do that work. And it can look so different for different women. I'll talk about women in this moment, but men have mother wounds too. Just to distill down what a mother wound is, generally we have a place in our psyche where we didn't feel met by our parents. And that will manifest generally in our relationships with other people, with our work, with the things that are meaningful to us. And so I like to create a mirror that the way that we were mothered creates a template for how we mother ourselves. And so when you're thinking about creating something, I like to give people sort of like, okay, well, we all kind of have some version of a mother wound or father wound that we work with. How can we show up on an inter level, like a completely self to self level, and start to repair the way that we are with ourselves, the way that we nourish ourselves, the way that we take care of ourselves, the way that we speak to ourselves, and the way that we treat ourselves. That's generally like the first place I like to insert resource is there, having women like kind of reflect on how they were mothered, things that they felt like were missing, things that they wish that they had had, and then start to take the steps to empower themselves to give the thing that they were missing when they were little to their own selves. So like a very simple practice would be just looking in the mirror in the morning and rather than, or maybe as a first step, noticing what the dialogue is. Because generally when women look in the mirror, they criticize themselves or they're like, okay, this needs to go, this is wrong, I need to change this, but just offering like a tender gaze and saying something like, I love you, I'm so happy that you are. Like really simple practices that are going to start to create more trust within the psyche. So like I could just imagine this being applied to doing like a launch or having a program where you're like interfacing and teaching and leading. When you mess up, how are you talking to yourself? When you don't feel inspired or you feel self-doubt, what is the inner dialogue? Going in and doing repair in those places is going to make you feel more solid, more confident, and just more loved in yourself. So it's like being your own best friend and being willing to like really care for yourself in that minute way so that when you're doing these really big projects or you're interfacing in a public way, you've got your own back and you feel supported by yourself, and the conversations you're having with yourself are supportive and nourishing rather than critical and demeaning.
What has been coming up for me in the last 2 weeks is the notion of self-trust. And I was thinking about this and meditating on it for this time because I was realizing that I was having a hard time making decisions. The founder of Peace Lab, I'm trying to think about the best thing to do every single day. And there was a point last week where I was getting paralyzed between the decision making. I was like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. Like, am I supposed to do this instead? I was just kind of spiraling and not being present. And when I was journaling about self-trust, I started to pay attention to that inner dialogue. I understood like when they talk about like feminine energies and masculine energies, and we have both of these energies in us. It has nothing to do with gender. It's just different characteristics that we all have as an individual. I understood it at a rudimentary level, but it was really until last week when I was trying to think about self-trust and my inner dialogue that it really clicked to me that the feminine energy inside of me was that creation. What was the visionary of the idea that wanted to be the painter and dance and sing and like have this space. And the masculine energy was really that container, that the law-making, governing energy within you that's like, I love this idea, let me help you execute and to create and for it to manifest. I started to recognize this because it was my inner masculine that was actually was speaking very poorly to me, and it was very controlling and rigid and not allowing the feminine parts of me to be expressive and free and playful, because the masculine energy within me was like, you have deadlines, you got to make this decision. If it's not a good decision, then this is going to happen. And it was just like the spiraling energy. And I was reflecting a lot about my uncle, and he is so steady and calming and a grounded presence in my life. I was reflecting on his energy as the masculine and started to really feel that I could integrate those aspects into my life so I could lead with my idea and just have a more grounded and steady and trustworthy energy within me. And it starts with that inner dialogue of changing the language from less rigid, like a warden, and more of a calming, grounded father within me. And it felt really good because I was like, okay, so even if I do come up to a challenge or a problem the next day, I trust me. I trust that I know what I'm doing. And if I make a mistake, it's that self-compassion, that self-love that I give myself, even in those moments. And I think that's extremely important for founders or any type of entrepreneur, and even skills that you want to teach your team that you are building, because it's when you beat yourself up mentally, you are not going to get anywhere. You're going to be fried and you're not able to create anything, because it's like how you would speak to a child.
Exactly. Which brings me to the inner child, which is a huge, huge, huge part of the work that I do, is really contacting the inner child. And when you were talking about like that creative, joyful, playful, that is the inner child. And that being within you is led by the heart. So it's like whatever the heart is called to do is the inner child's inkling, and generally very connected to the spirit realm, very connected to the divine, very connected to your genius and your mastery on this planet and your purpose. So once we are able to get those inner parents, like you were talking about, that masculine and feminine energy within us into a state of balance where they're working together to support the child within to pursue the dream or create the magic or whatever it is that we're creating in that moment, then we're going to see a lot more, not only fulfillment from the work that we're doing and satisfaction, but also like movement. Because the child, that genius, they know, like there's no like doubt or anything. That's all the conditioning and all the defense mechanisms that have come from the way that we are parented, maybe in some distortions that we then take on as behavioral patterns within our own self to like keep ourselves safe or do the thing that we were conditioned is correct or appropriate. And I feel like that's where we really need to break free, is like giving the child a safe place, the inner child, a safe place to then use the imagination, connect to the innocence so that we can create like a new world. Really, I mean, I'm talking about some of the things that I felt like were at the basis of what you guys are promoting here with like regenerative work and healing and transformation. It's like our inner children, they have the map for the new world that we're trying to create. And we kind of have to move out of the way. And there's a lot of conditioning that we have as a collective that we have to unpack and really be like, oh, yeah, I see that you did that behavior of being really hard on yourself and really like time constrained in order to get this result. But we're not there anymore. And the way that we need to work now is more cooperative. And we need to create healing, because in order for us to live in this world and create something better for the next generation, and create businesses that are actually really like kind of next level and really going to support what we're moving into as a collective, we need to unpack that stuff and do the healing work so that we can create things that are really inspiring and create things that are really supportive to what we're birthing in humanity. So kind of big picture concept. So I love that you were able to share about your process, because that's where I love to work. When I'm working with my clients, I like to hear like what is going on for them interpersonally, like maybe in their relationship with their partner, or what is like coming up in their psyche and their nightmares or their dreams about this baby. Like going in on that nitty-gritty level and just talking about something as simple as, oh, well, I was experiencing self-doubt. You're like, that is so normal. That is so human. Like we can start there, we can work there, rather than just focusing on a result or focusing on the child who's going to be born. There's also everybody's walking around with a child that needs a little bit more safety, I think, in this world. And we are the masters of that universe, the inner universe. And so if we can work on that level, which is what I get really inspired about, we're creating a more safe environment for creation to be expanding and evolving in a way that brings benefit to humanity.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think this is allowing this inner child to be taken care of is so important, because it's like this is where your creativity and your inspiration lives. And we can't ignore it, right? You can have a North Star of where you're going. Like, I want to clean up the oceans. You can have that vision, and that idea might come from this inner child. But how do you, that's the maintaining part that we're talking about, that you can't, put it off for 30 minutes or next week when you have downtime to address and get to. It's really this constant reparenting every single day, the way that you speak to yourself, the way that you check in with your emotions in real time, the way that you give people presence with their emotions. It's all interrelated. And I do think that, especially a lot of the people that we interview for the Purpose Studio, they have this understanding and this knowing. And it is, I think we are making steps collectively where people are starting to introduce this to more like different types of industries that you wouldn't even think about. Like I've heard some founders talk about doing this training, counseling, and therapy with people in the automobile industry. And that's really inspiring and makes me so excited, because to me, it's one and the same. You have an idea, you're building something, whether you are in the corporate setting or not, it's still part of that exchange. All the work that I do, I can't remove the inner dialogue. I can't remove the spiritual lessons and the teachings that come with it. It's always the same. And so when I'm working with leaders or, founders, and I'm part of their team, and they open up that space for that kind of dialogue and to allow me to be fully present in my emotions and where I'm at with my career or in my personal life, like we're not overwhelming the situation, but having that really honest and transparent dialogue is where I feel the most safe. And I feel like, oh, I'm going to show up and actually help them carry their mission forward because I have this opportunity to be myself. Another question for somebody who's just starting off, what should they do? They get a therapist, they get a coach, they start a journaling practice. Like, what are some of the things that they could do if they are just like listening to this podcast and they're like, okay, well, I'm a founder and I have this team and I don't know where to start. Like, what kind of questions should I ask myself? We talk about this inner child and like maybe dissecting some of these things that come up, like self-doubt or insecurity or anything stress related. But is there some place that they could start, and what are some of the resources that they could look for as well?
That's a great question. There's a woman, her name is Margaret Paul, and she wrote a very short book and created a technique called inner bonding. And it's a 6-step process. It's extremely easy. And she basically teaches you how to bond with your inner child. And there's a TED talk on it. We can totally, I can get you a link to drop in the notes. It's kind of genius how simple it is. It's just a very simple process. But I really think that making space for the inner child and noticing the places where you have distortions can be a totally personal journey. It doesn't have to be with a therapist. It can be, and it might be helpful for folks who maybe have more like numbness or defenses against feeling themselves and feeling what's true for themselves to have a therapist to work through this stuff with. But I really think just doing simple practices during your mundane life where you notice your inner dialogue and you maybe just insert a little bit more kindness, like I was saying, like in the mirror, or just it could be a journaling practice where you're like, I feel this way, and then you just go into it and you give yourself a chance to like really explore what is being felt without needing to change it necessarily, but just maybe through that process being like, well, where did this come from? Or how did I start doing this? Or where did I learn this from? And how is this impacting me? Can be so, I think, cathartic, kind of like how you were sharing your own experience. And I like to make things really easy for people in terms of barrier of entry. And I think that just basically noticing how you talk to yourself and maybe writing it down and then just seeing if you can create some type of a mindfulness practice where you notice how you're feeling when you speak to yourself in that way, and then you notice how you're feeling in comparison if you just add a little bit of kindness or patience or vulnerability, just how much that can impact how you feel about yourself. Often when I talk to people, because I do a lot of healing sessions with people, they're always adding another layer of emotion on top of the emotion that they have. So like they'll feel, for instance, like I feel sad that I didn't, or I feel disappointed that I didn't get to put this thing out today, and I feel guilty. So they'll add like this second layer of judging themselves for the way that they are. And I think that that is like a huge seeing when you're able to be like, oh, okay, that is extra and that is all me. And that if I just took that one thing out and just sat with the disappointment, I would feel so much better and it would be so much easier to manage than having to manage disappointment and I'm guilting myself or shaming myself. You know what I mean? So I think that's a great place to start.
Wow. So I do this all the time where sometimes I'll have my to-dos for the day and I'm like, okay, I got to get a podcast recording in today. I got to edit and then I need to write something. And the hours will go by and I only do the first thing. Like I only do the podcast recording and I feel guilt, you know? I don't want to kind of get on to myself about the fact that like time, maybe I was in the process and I lost track of time and it's a really good product at the end of the day and I didn't get to the other things. I have to keep on doing this, but I it's really hard for me sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is to do what you're saying and saying, okay, like here's the guilt on top of the stress or the overwhelm, how to actually break it apart and be like, it's okay to experience this. So you're saying to just to hold space for your emotions and being like, I feel guilt right now.
Name it and feel it and like feel the texture of it and notice where you actually have agency there. Because, like, let's just say, things got out of hand and you weren't able to get to those other two things. They might have been out of your control, but the guilting, there is a level of choice that is happening there. Maybe it's unconscious, but there's a small moment where you have an option of whether you're going to add that layer of shaming yourself. I feel like that is where we get into the shoulds. And I think that that can be very paralyzing. How does your inner child feel when you're like, you have to go do this thing that you might not want to do? I know that when I was a little kid and somebody told me what I had to do, I felt pretty upset about being forced to do something. Just sitting with what that feels like and the impact that you're having on yourself when you add those layers can help you to see what the problem is and just go, oh, I'm doing that. I learned that from this person. Do I want to keep doing that? Do I have free will? There we go. I mean, that's the option there. It's like, yes, maybe that is not helping me. Maybe what would be more driving for me is to get up and do a movement practice and then come back to my to-do list and try again. Or maybe I'm putting too much stuff on my to-do list. Like really getting clear with why are like resistance. I think that's what we're talking about right now. Generally resistance, it comes into play for many different reasons. And so it's just good to notice why and really sit with, okay, I feel guilty right now. Why am I guilty? Oh, because I was doing this, but I should have been doing this. Well, why should I have been doing this? Like who's saying that? And kind of like unpacking the different parts of self within that tiny little dynamic that you're having to be able to see like, oh, well, actually, when I was little, my dad used to say that if I wasn't productive, then I wasn't lovable. Like there was an energy of like I needed to do this, this, and this in order to be accepted in my family system. And then you go, oh, well, wait, is that true now? Because I'm not little and I don't live in that house anymore. And then you get to really like look at those relationships and make decisions and conscious choices as to, well, what is your value system and how do you want to live and what's important to you? I think that introducing agency is a very good step with mindfulness.
What I'm hearing too is just kind of slowing down and just pausing. I'm reading right now, I've had it for so many years, but Women Who Run with the Wolves. So good. It's literally so good. And I just, it's so funny because I've had it for years and I've just never, I read a couple of pages, but now I'm actually like really getting into it. And I think it always happens when you're able to digest it. I think I was reading it. Something that I just kind of been thinking about too is just slowing down the time and pausing. We are living in such a fast-paced society now, and everything is so quick that we don't even allow ourselves the moment to take 5 minutes and breathe before the meeting or the next task that you're supposed to get to because we don't feel like we have enough time. And I catch myself all the time where I go throughout the day and I'm like, have I took a breath today? And if I do, is it really going to be detrimental to the rest of the routine? And it's not. So this is what I've been just trying to work on as well, that actually taking those few moments of silence. And I think she talks about like as wolves. She's like wolves, before they assess the situation, they're silent. They watch, they observe, and then they go with their plan. And I really like that because nature's not quick to rush like this. It's just slow and steady, and then you go and you execute. So yeah, I've just been trying to slow down my days a little bit more this way. I mean, you're in Maine right now, and the property you live on, it's very calming and quiet. And when I was there, I definitely had like my own time to integrate a lot of the things. But especially living in New York in the city, you get so caught up in that. But it's really about practicing this mindfulness in this present.
I was just wanted to draw another metaphor because when I'm doing my work with women when they're pregnant, a lot of what I am hoping to share and guide them into is the slowing down to meet the child because actually children, they operate on a different timing, especially babies. I mean, maybe you had friends that are parents now. Just getting into the car to go somewhere, it just takes a lot longer because children, they're curious, they have this innocence about them and they're moving through time space in a different way. And I think talking about that initiation experience of birth, I think it can be very confronting when you're moving like in the city realm really fast and then you have a baby and you're supposed to just sit there and breastfeed with them like all day and sleep. It's like, wait, no, what? I have so much I have to do. Like that is a conflicting. Those are two worlds that do not move at the same pacing. And so what you just shared, I think is such a beautiful key for the creation process too, because I think also the energy of spark and ignition, when you have a new idea, it's like boom, boom, boom. There's a lot of like fire. But then once it's out, you kind of have to drop into like earth of like making this thing function at the pacing of like slower than you would have hoped. Like there's a process, and that can be really debilitating. I know as a creator to have the thing out and then be like, why isn't it doing the thing that I wanted to do? And it's like, we have to, like a garden, you can't be like, okay, I put the seed in the ground, so where's the fruit? It's like, no, there's a process, and nature does teach us, I feel like. And that's when I say unwinding, like coming to my land and doing unwinding. We all need to do unwinding. And that happens through slowing down, through taking deep breaths, through just being with any one moment. You were asking for suggestions. I think that's a great suggestion for anybody who's doing anything in this world is just to see if you can slow down and infuse some breaths and some presence into any part of your experience that you'll receive benefit from that as well.
There's two things I want to speak about now from this is that the birthing process and what you do as a midwife, this care, this feminine energy, this presence, all of these things, I was excited about this conversation because I'm like, how do we incorporate this into the startup world, in the impact space where sometimes you're dealing with community conflicts and challenges that are really overwhelming and detrimental to society, whether it's the environment or conflict that's going on, whatever it is. These are sometimes the challenges feel so trauma filled or catastrophic. And I want to be able to share with these founders and these teams that are working on some of these things that a lot of these things that go through the birth process or even in midwifery are translatable. It's okay to bring it into this space. It actually should coexist. We live in a very patriarchal society, and we need to go back to these feminine and whether you call it indigenous or communal practices, and bring them into spaces like this, because it's actually for the benefit of a society and the impact that you're driving. So I just wanted to kind of like touch on some of these things like care, intention, slowing down for all of these different touch spaces. And the second part of this, I would love to segue into community and holding service with people around you and really taking from that wisdom, because I think a lot of the feminine energy also is having your women around you. Even traditionally in the birthing spaces, we had the aunts and the sisters, and everybody was there to kind of help with this process. And so I kind of want to bring these themes into what's kind of missing right now in different spaces, like the startup, the tech space, or corporate space.
I can appreciate that for sure. Community building is a massive part of the work that I do for sure. I think I was sharing with you when you were up here. I got very clear instruction to begin offering a new moon women's gathering here on my land, that I'm not like making money with it at all. It's more just about giving back to the community that I serve and creating a space where women can connect with other women and be very vulnerable and just open, but also have the container of safety where it doesn't get too spindled out and people going into processes. Because I think a lot of people are really nervous around trauma. And so when women or anybody open up about something, there's this, I think a lot of people will retract or they'll pull back because they don't know if it's safe to even be like hearing what people are going through. And I think that can create a lot of maybe isolation, but also avoidance of depth. And I think that my work as a ceremonialist, all about creating safety and container where there's very clear guidelines and there's very clear sort of a structure for the feminine to then come and be heard or witnessed. So it's not like we're going to go into a 30-minute process where somebody's just like talking and complaining about maybe some of the things that are going on in their lives. Like that's not going to be helpful to the space. It's going to drain the space. And so when I'm creating a ceremony, letting people know we're going to share in this way. I would love to hear like, what are some challenges for you, or what are some things that are going right for you? And we're going to just witness you. We're not going to interface or just like really interject at all. We're just going to create a little moment where you can be seen for what you're going through. And then we're going to honor that and we're going to move on. It's like creating these spaces of safety where people can be witnessed in their process, but it's not about doing anything. And kind of like we were talking about with space and presence and breath, I think a lot of people in their mind are like, well, we don't have time to go into people's personal life, or we don't, but I do think that it creates a sense of connectivity and loyalty between communities that, if a company did have a space where everybody had a moment to check in and it wasn't about fixing anybody or really doing anything with that information, but just including the individual within the collective of whatever's being created, I think that's really beneficial. I love ceremony because it is so much about beauty. And I really see the way that it weaves like an invisible thread between the hearts of each person who's joining in to share in that space. And I really do feel it is something that can be like infused into corporate work or whatever, because any of these collectives that are working towards a common goal are in a community together. But if you don't acknowledge it as so, or the community has a certain maybe void culture where it's like, I think about corporate buildings and just how depersonalized it feels. It almost asking you to show up and like leave yourself at the door, which yes, while you're working, you don't need to be processing your individual life. But I think if there's just a little space made for that feminine to be brought forth, there's going to be a sense of belonging within that community where people really feel like they matter and that there is a space for them to be the fullness of themselves along with doing the job that they're being asked to do.
I love that. So I studied peace building, and peace building is really community centric and locally led. And what these words mean is that you're really getting your insight and the context of the conflict from listening and being part of the community. And one of my professors in peace building, he spent like 20 years in Iraq, and he would always he's from the US, and he would always tell us that when he went over there, especially in the very beginning, to help Iraqis with their peace building strategy and training and what they were going to do for their community to help with conflict, he said, oftentimes I was just invited to dinner with them for 2 hours. And he was like, it was maybe even 2 weeks of just not even working, but just going to dinner and eating and laughing and experiencing like the life of Iraqi. That's exactly what it is because in those moments of communal gathering, sharing food, stories, laughing, you are able to pick up on so much of the context, and the inspiration and the creativity starts to flow more easily because you know exactly what to do. And you're creating these connections with people, and people are showing up and giving more of themselves and more of themselves for the cause, whatever it is. And in these traditional work environments, it's really important to study these different spaces that are more susceptible to community gatherings and these kind of more feminine leaning teachings, even if it's not the same industry or space, because they're really teaching us something about gathering. And when we're thinking about regenerative business or creating a more sustainable output for the environment or people, we really have to start to be a little bit more creative and innovative in our thinking. And if you're working with a team where no one's actually interacting, and like you said, they're living their personality at the door, it's not going to allow change for growth to happen, for people to stay there, even for people to be inspired by the same purpose. And because I think we've lost that really in our society right now. I feel like we need more of that community building.
Yeah, like within my business, we have 5 women that work together on elemental birthrights, and we do ceremony together, and it creates such a web and weaving of interconnectedness within our collective. And it really, talking about retreat, because that's what we offer here, Roselight Sanctuary, like I think it actually does have a place within a work environment, that there would be retreat where people would go deep with each other and form really strong bonds in order to be able to work together in a way that's like really inspiring and more like a synarchy where everybody's bringing their genius to the table, and there isn't necessarily these hierarchical levels, but everybody's coming as an equal and bringing forth what shines within them the most, and everybody's supporting each person being at the highest expression of who they are. People can be so transformative and bonding in that way.
When we are thinking about impact-driven entrepreneurship, or like we were just talking about, like honoring some of these teachings about community and service and healing, is there anything else that you feel that you want to say about this topic to really drive home this connection and why it's super important?
Yeah, I mean, creation is creation. Creation is always going to be creation. And I do feel like women have a certain key into creation that is our blood and is our moon cycle and is our ability to birth. And I think that the feminine holds a lot of wisdom when it comes to what is needed in order to create, and also having women in leadership in businesses and really like bringing women-centered thinking and beingness into businesses is going to be beneficial for every sector of our world, especially government and peace building. I really feel like women in leadership is probably what is missing most out of a world stage of leadership. And having a uterus and being able to create life and birth life onto this planet, it moves the needle in evolution and human consciousness. And so I really do feel that listening to women speak and hearing women's voices in spaces where there's trying to be initiated great change is something that midwifery highlights. Like the women that I sit at, it's them who are bringing forth the new life. And so they are at the center of the care. And even though husbands, men are part of the birthing team and they're part of the family, they take a supportive role and they really hold open the container. And I think that, there's a model there that could be translated into business and entrepreneurship, even for man-driven businesses and men who are creating as entrepreneurs for their feminine, which we talked about, like to have more space within the creative process, and to be leading with the heart in that way rather than the mind. I really do think that there's a movement there and that there's a lot of magic and power to be said about the feminine.
You're so beautifully well spoken. I love it. Thank you so much. It's so good. I wanted to ask one last question for you, because this is the Purpose Studio. And it's all about inspiring people to, kind of find their calling, their purpose. It will move and transform the way it does, but it's all about kind of like re-inspiring hope, service, and community. And so I just wanted to ask you, what does purpose look like to you? And how do you continue to live like that each day?
I was sharing about in the beginning of my journey with working with the plants and trying to figure that out because it felt so important. And we had talked with our dear shared sister about the book Man's Search for Meaning. I do feel and believe that purpose is one of the most important aspects of human development in order to live a life that has meaning. For me, it was a really important question, and I do feel like it is a question that is privilege. To be able to ask yourself, what is my purpose, means that you have enough safety in your field, enough probably economic security around you, that you're looking for the next step. It's okay, I've got the survival thing taken care of. Like I'm able to eat and I'm able to be sheltered and I'm safe. What is the next thing? And I think it really is for me. It is healing, and that is my service. And service feels like the extension of my love for my humanity, that I am in the privileged position to be able to do more than just survive, then I want to give back. And for me, it's always been about healing and bringing more safety, peace, connectivity, relatability, and love to humanity, whether it be for the earth, of the earth, to the earth, between humans and individuals, humans within family systems, families within cultures. I really want to see this planet a better place than when I came in, when I leave. And I will do everything that I can every day to have my small impact and just ripple out my personal purpose into the collective by the people that I have the chance to impact. And I feel really good about that. And I feel like Roselight Sanctuary is the child of that purpose. And I look forward to hosting different types of events here where people can come and slow down and unwind, like we had spoken about, because that is where I feel like people are going to connect to their purpose and their meaning. You know, if they have the ability to focus on the things beyond survival, then the next step would be to slow down enough to understand, well, why am I here? And what am I supposed to be doing with my time on a day-to-day basis? And then from that place, it's such a personal journey, but purpose does feel like it's a really important question for people to be asking at this time, if they have the ability to ask that question, and then to heed the call and take the steps that it takes in order to answer the calling. That's the practice, and that's where we need the tools and the resources of how we speak to ourselves and how we stay motivated and how we stay healthy. I'm excited here on my land to be able to continue to stay motivated and just loving my life and loving the people around me and the earth, and being able to bring healing forth to humans and to the earth.
Thank you, Rachel. This was very healing in itself, this conversation. You have such beautiful words and you are living and acting of service. And I'm so glad that we got to have you as a guest today.
Thanks, Neva. I'm really grateful and honored to be able to be a part of this project, and obviously really support any women who are bringing voices forward to be able to have more understanding of each other and more creativity flowing in this time where I feel like creative endeavors really are a great way to focus our energy when there's a lot of frustration and tumult in our world. It can be very distracting and all-consuming if you are focusing on that. So it's really important that we stay with our hearts open and continue to create hope and weave hope with what it is that we love, and focusing on that and bringing that forward and sharing that with others. My website is elementalbirthrights.com, where I offer coursework for birthing families who are wanting to treat their birthing experience as a rites of passage. It's also a place where I interface with other birth workers who want to guide other couples through the work that I created, which is a medicine meal, where we do shadow work and work through this different archetypal energies of healing in order to prepare for life as an initiation, because we're just being faced with one initiation after the other. Then we have a beautiful podcast that we do about monthly on elemental birthrights, where you can find that on Spotify. It's called Reclaiming the Sacred Feminine Arts with Elemental Birthrights. We explore a lot of different topics, kind of along some of the stuff that I've shared today. And then my rural Maine, in the Down East Maine region, midwifery practice is elementalmidwifery.com. And you can find us on Instagram at Elemental Birthrights and Elemental Midwifery. And then our beautiful retreat center, if you're wanting to host a small scale gathering, workshop, or event in a very beautiful natural setting with a private bathhouse and a beautiful event space, you can find information about our land and our project, roselightsanctuary.com. Thank you so much, Nada, for having me.
Thank you. It's gorgeous. Thank you so much.